Hi everybody, welcome to week 3 of the Birch Gnomes Quilt Along. We are going to be making our tree blocks this week, and the fabrics that you're going to be using are your medium or dark gray solid. That will be the background. And then for the trees, you're going to be using those cream or white low volume prints with that black or gray or brown background that you'd find on that you chose in week 1. So I'm going to go ahead and get these items all starched, just like we did for week 2 when we made the gnome blocks, so that our fabric doesn't stretch all wonky when we cut it, and we'll take it from there. I've got my strips all cut that I need for one of the tree blocks, and what you're going to end up with when you cut your dark gray strip is a piece at the top that's folded over. If you hang on to that piece, you can put 2 of them together and you're going to have enough for one more birch block or birch tree block. So don't throw that folded piece away. You're going to want to save it to use it on another block. So you've got your dark gray, and we're going to go through cutting the branches out in just a minute. What you're going to want to pull from your pattern to do that, there is a template. You don't need to use the template, but some people felt a little more comfortable with just some guidance on where to cut those lines. So I'll show you how to cut it with and without the template. And then I have gone ahead and I've cut my strips that are in the pattern out of my cream with a little bit of black in it. The one wider strip we're going to taper, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute as well. And then you have a medium-sized strip that's a whole width of fabric, and you have a somewhat skinny strip that is that whole width of fabric as well. So those measurements are in the pattern. Go ahead and get those 3 cream pieces cut, and I will show you then how to taper and how to cut your tree lines. I've taken my little marking pen here and I have measured over from one side of the widest strip that you're going to cut from the cream fabric. And as the directions in the pattern state, you're going to want to taper from the wide end all the way up to where you marked if you measured from the other side over. And it doesn't have to be exact. Every tree can be just a little bit different, and I want you to have that philosophy as you're making all of them. So that little skinny strip that you cut off, you can just go ahead and throw that away. That's too little to save for anything. So this will be the trunk of your tree. And we're going to use that at the very end, so you can set that aside for now. And then let's go ahead and get those tree branches cut using the template first. I'll show you how that works. So just lay them out a little bit apart, and then you can put your template right on the center, lining it up here. Again, just eyeball it, because your branches of your tree can be different on every single tree that you make. They don't need to be exact. I would say the biggest thing that you'll want to make sure when you're cutting your tree branches from this gray fabric is don't start cutting these secondary branches too far out into the piece of gray, because once you sew the little branches in place, you're going to trim this entire tree block down to size. And if you start cutting these or sewing these little secondary branches too far over, they end up getting trimmed off and they're just like a little smidge of a branch, and you want to be able to see that whole cute little branch in there. So I am going to be using my rotary cutter that has a dull blade in it that I use for cutting through paper sometimes. And the fabric tells you to cut apart your template. I'm just going to do that here with my rotary cutter. Okay, and we'll use this side for that one, so I'll set that aside for now. And then you can see I've kind of centered it on here. Just go ahead and start cutting apart your branches using that template. So you're going to cut all the way through from edge to edge. So there's one primary branch, and because I'm using my not so sharp rotary cutter, it's giving me a little bit of a problem getting through, so just give it a couple snips if you have to. And then you can go ahead, pull that apart, and go ahead and cut that secondary branch. And I'm just going to set that template aside, but I'm going to keep it in order so it's not like a big puzzle piece at the end. So when I cut my next branch, if you want to use the template, you can. Honestly, by the time you cut a few of these, you're going to be comfortable just cutting them by hand and not having to use that template. So there is one part of that half of the tree. And then you can go ahead and line up your template again where you had it. And you can cut your other primary and secondary branches from there, just following right along those lines. Oops, wrong rotary cutter. If you cut through paper, it's going to be dull faster than you want it to be. So there's another piece cut, and the last cut will be right up here for that last secondary branch. Okay, so you can go ahead and use the template and get the other side cut just like I did here in this half. And if you don't want to use that template, like I said, you certainly don't have to. You can eyeball your branch cuts when you make them. Again, the one thing that you want to just be sure of is when you cut these secondary branches, those are the smaller ones, those have to be cut closer to the center than they are to the other edge. Otherwise, you'll lose that branch when you trim your block down to size. Okay, so I'm going to cut the other one and we'll see what they look like then. What your branches are going to look like when they're cut with the template. And again, you can certainly just freehand that all. This is just a quick little tip. I've transferred my cut tree sides to another little, if you have a little tray or another little board that you have handy, this way you can move them back and forth between your cutting table and your sewing machine easily. So I'll go ahead and get that piece set aside. And then if you're cutting your tree branches without using that template, it's basically the same concept, and you can just look at the template if you'd like to. I think it's actually easier. You're just gonna go ahead and somewhat towards that bottom third, cut that first big branch, go up towards the top, angle maybe a little bit differently, going through that, about the center of your rectangle strip here. Go ahead and cut that second big branch. And then if you pull those apart just a little bit, you can see where you want your secondary branches to go. Again, I'm starting it nearer the center than the middle because I don't want to lose any of that secondary branch. So you can just go ahead and cut those pieces. And there's one half. I think it's faster. So then you'll go ahead and do the same for the other branch. If your branches go up or they go down, honestly, every single tree is different, so it does not matter one little iota. What the trick of this is going to be is just keeping your branch pieces in order, because honestly, if you move them out of order, it gets to be like a jigsaw puzzle and you don't want to have to worry about, oh gosh, which piece went where. There. All right. So there is my tree, and what I'm going to do first is I'm going to start working with my skinniest branches. Those are my what I call the secondary branches. So you'll take the skinniest piece of cream fabric that you have, and what I like to do is go ahead and trim that fabric so it's a little bit more workable. So keep it about a good inch or so beyond where that cut is, and on either side, so that when you trim this, you don't trim off part of it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and use my scissors to snip that secondary branch. And then there was another skinny little branch up here. I'm gonna go beyond where that angled edge is, and I'm gonna snip that second branch there. And what I suggest doing really is working on one half of your tree at a time. So we'll save these skinny branches and wider branches once we've got this half all done. So when you have your skinny branches cut, go ahead to your sewing machine, get those sewn onto each side, and then press toward the gray so that you don't see the seam allowance coming through on that cream fabric. And I'll show you then how to put your wider branches in. Okay, so as you're sewing these pieces together, you're going to come to find out that you're going to maybe get confused a little bit about which way the dark gray piece is supposed to be tilted or sewed on. So a little trick with that would be to take your erasable marking pen or a little pencil and just make a little bitty line or a little bitty dot along where those seams are going to go between your branches. Let's see, here's the other one right here. And then right here would be that other one. And so that way when you're moving these strips or these pieces that are cut back and forth between your sewing machine or even while you're at your sewing machine, you'll know that this is the side that gets sewed onto the branch, not this side. So that's just a helpful little tip because trust me, it gets a little bit confusing, but that's really the only part. Just take your time and make sure that you are knowing which side of this piece gets sewed onto the branch. So like I said, we'll do the second half later. Now that I've gotten these small secondary branches sewed on, I like to use a smaller ruler to go ahead and trim those edges. So it's really forgiving. You're going to trim this entire block down to size when you're done putting it all together. And so things don't have to be exact. If you end up trimming off a little bit of that gray piece when you trim this so that you can sew that wider branch on, that's okay. Really, the size that these gray strips are allow for a little bit of wiggle room in the trimming process. And I don't really need to trim this one because I would trim it at the end, but we'll go ahead and get it trimmed off anyway just to make it nice and neat. Okay, so now I'm going to take my wider strip and I'm going to do the same that I did with those narrow branches. So first of all, go ahead and get some snipped so that it makes it a little bit easier and you're not working with this whole width of fabric strip. And like I said, you just want to make sure it extends a little bit beyond, because once you sew it together, that will kind of get caught up in the seam allowance. You don't want to have it too short. So get both of them trimmed up here. And then go ahead and get these wider branches sewed on. And again, press towards the gray. Now a little bit will come over into this cream. That's okay, you can't help that. Here's one more little tip as you're sewing your little branches together. Just go ahead and sew one piece at a time and let your other pieces laying flat on your cutting board or your tray that you've got them on. Then when you get that one piece sewed on to the branch, you can go ahead and kind of line it up and you can see right where that other gray piece needs to go. And you can go ahead and get that flipped over right sides together and take it back to your sewing machine to get that piece sewed on. That way you're not over at your machine trying to arrange your pieces. So just another little tip if it's giving you a little bit of a trouble as you're sewing them together. Just let me go over that last piece one more time. I've gotten this whole top piece put together And now I'm bringing it back to my cutting table and I'm lining up where that bottom piece needs to get sewn on. And so you've got it lined up, and then you can go right ahead and flip it over so it's right sides together and take it back to your machine. All right, I have got all of my branches sewn in place, and if you notice, I did not trim any of those wider branch pieces. We're going to do that in just a minute. From the width of fabric strip that you cut, you're going to have a little chunk left over of each of those widths, just so you can see how much is left over. It gives you a little wiggle room in case you made any mistakes. And what we're going to want to do now is trim the inside of these units so that you can go ahead and get that tree trunk sewn on. So I'm not going to worry about trimming the outside pieces that are hanging over. You're going to just do that at the end when you trim your block up to size anyway. So what you're going to want to do is line up your ruler so that along that bottom line, which is going to be your straight line yet, that's what you're going to make sure that that inside is square to, because the top line you've sewn that branch in and that's no longer a square line to go ahead and line up to measure from or trim from. So I've got the bottom lined up and I'm not taking much off. There's only honestly about a little 1/8 of an inch on that side, and you'll see up here it gets a little bit wider. And that's just how the pieces shifted when I sewed them together. Again, this block is pretty forgiving. You're going to do trimming, sewing together, trimming, sewing together, trimming. So go ahead and get one side trimmed so that it is nice and straight for you to sew that branch or that trunk together with. And I just want to show you how this side, the top piece got sewn on really kind of wonky. That's because I did it back at my machine and I didn't have it laying here, honestly, lined up just exactly when I put right sides together. It's still going to be okay. You're going to have enough measurement once you get your tree trunk sewn in to get your block true to size yet. So just another little tip of, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it around so I can cut it right-handed here. Measuring from the bottom again. Just a little tip, so when you are sewing your branches in place, you want to make sure that you're getting them as lined up as you can. Like I said, it's going to be forgiving. I'm going to be okay. Again, I have just like a little bit of an 1/8 of an inch right here in the middle that's going to get trimmed off. Not even a 1/4 on the bottom, and then quite a bit on top, but we're still going to be okay. So go ahead and get that side trimmed up. And then what you're going to do is take your tapered tree trunk, and you'll notice it matches pretty closely. Go ahead and sew one side on first, and then you're going to sew the other side on, and you're going to press the seams, this time though towards the cream, because you've got so many little seams in here that are going to make it all puckery and bulky underneath if you try pressing it towards the gray. So this time you'll press your seams toward that tree trunk. So I've got one side sewed on. This is going to look a little bit like an angle when you sew this side on. That's okay. Again, we're going to trim our block to size when we're all done. So go ahead and line that up as close to the bottom of the trunk as you can. That way you don't have much to cut off the bottom when you do your final trim. Put it right sides together and go ahead and sew it and press again towards the trunk. Well, we are almost done with our block. What we need to do now is get it trimmed to size. So as you can see, there's not right now a straight line to measure against to get your block squared up. So what you're going to want to do is, because the bottom is as close to square as possible, just go ahead and kind of eyeball it and get a square bottom piece cut, because that will give us a line then to measure from. And don't take too much off. You can see I've only got, again, about 1/8 of an inch there on that skinny side, and it got a little wider, but that's what I needed to trim. Now you have a square side to measure from. Go ahead and flip your block over, and what you're going to do is measure the height of what your block needs to be according to the pattern. So I am going to go ahead and get that top piece trimmed off, and I'm going to be measuring, lining up my ruler from the bottom. As you can see, my ruler doesn't quite fit all the way across, but what I can do is just do the measurement and trim and just kind of slide my ruler as I go, making sure if that's the line I'm lined up to that I'm, keeping it measured accordingly. And so go ahead and get your top piece trimmed to size, and then I'll show you how to measure or trim off those side pieces and get your block finished. Okay, so I have the height of my tree block, and I just want to give you another little tip. As I had trimmed my bottom, when I went to measure how high I wanted my tree to be, I honestly had only about this much of this little branch right here sticking up, and I wanted a little bit more of that. So what I did was I trimmed another 1/2 inch off the bottom so that I still got, you can see plenty of measurement this way, but it let me have a little bit of a taller tree branch right here. Okay, so you have the height trimmed, and now you need to trim your sides. The pattern will tell you what the measurement needs to be. And what you now have is 2 sides to measure against. Whatever that measurement on the pattern is telling you, find the halfway mark on your ruler and kind of eyeball that up and down the middle of the trunk, and that will give you one side to measure from. And then you're going to go ahead and measure from that side to get your entire tree block to measure to size. Okay, so I've got to kind of eyeball that up here, and I'm lining up. Go right on a line. I'm lining up right here, and so I can go ahead and get one side trimmed, and then I can flip it over, and that gives me a side to measure from so that I can get the other side trimmed. So there's your cute little tree block. You're going to want to make 24 of them. And as you're making your 24 tree blocks and your 24 gnome blocks that go in this quilt, just know that week 4 of the quilt along is a catch-up week. I don't have all my blocks done yet either. So I will have a video and an email out next week along with a post, but week 4 is kind of a short week because it's going to be our catch-up week. Okay, have fun with it.